It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me, Conservative MP Richard Holden, Daily Mirror political correspondent Alita Adu, Labour MP Clive Lewis and Mo Lovett from the Academy of Ideas. Today.
Would the Prime Minister condone having a Christmas?
What's the answer?
I don't know.
It wasn't a party, it was cheese and wine.
Just be clear, it's not.
Is cheese and wine all right? No. It was a business meeting.
They parted and now they're laughing about it. They're treating the public with contempt.
Downing Street are not backing down. They continue to deny a Christmas party took place. Expect Keir Starmer to demand an explanation from Boris Johnson at Prime Minister's Questions. We'll have it live at noon. Also on the programme, more COVID restrictions look like they're imminent. And Storm Arwen, was it really the wrong kind of wind that caused all that damage? As you heard in the headlines, we are expecting an announcement at some point, either today, about more COVID restrictions being introduced, a plan B that has been talked about. But first, let's go back to that video obtained by ITV, which shows senior Number 10 staff joking about holding a Christmas party days after one was held there during lockdown. The Prime Minister's then Press Secretary, Allegra Stratton, is asked by colleagues about reports of a party as they rehearse a news conference in December last year. If you haven't seen it, here it is.
Reports on Twitter that there was a Downing Street Christmas party on Friday night. Do you recognise those reports?
I went home. Hold on.
Would the Prime Minister condone having a Christmas?
What's the answer?
I don't know.
It wasn't a party, it was cheese and wine.
Just be clear, it's not.
Is cheese and wine all right?
No.
It was a business meeting.
I'm joking.
It is recorded. His fictional party was a business meeting. And it was not socially distanced.
Richard, Downing Street are still denying a party, the party being joked about in that video that took place. Do you believe them?
Look, well, I wasn't invited to any form of event. I wasn't there. No. I have no knowledge of any specifics around.
I'm asking you if you
such an
believe
event.
Downing Street's line that a party didn't take place.
Well, what I think we need is some extra clarification on exactly what took place and when, because it's quite unacceptable. You know, my constituents were locked down. I was unable to see my family last Christmas. My constituents were unable to see their families, grandchildren. And you know, we're very, in very difficult circumstances, all in the interests of doing, the best for the country in a very difficult time. So I think we need some more clarification on exactly what took place.
Right, but are you now assured that a party did take place? I mean, watching that video, what did you think?
Well, that video is incredibly uncomfortable, I think, for the government after what's been said over the last few days. Our government. But I think that we need to have some clarity about what actually happened.
Right. I mean, the BBC has it confirmed that there was food, drink, party games in Downing Street on December the 18th last year. If that isn't a party, what is?
Well, exactly, and I think we need some clarification on that. As I say, I wasn't there. I wasn't invited to any form of event last year.
I understand that. What we're trying to investigate is what the government has said about a party that happened that they continue to deny. Just to be clear for everybody watching, any party in Downing Street or anywhere else in Whitehall would have breached the government's guidelines in place in December on the 18th last year. No social mixing indoors was allowed. So you can say categorically there cannot have been a party and all the rules being followed.
Well, as I've been very clear, I wasn't there. I don't know exactly what happened. So I think we'll need to find out, have a greater explanation from the government exactly what happened, because it's quite clear from that video that there are questions to answer.
Right. What do you think your constituents are thinking?
I think my constituents are thinking exactly what I'm thinking, is that, you know, we were all under lockdown restrictions last year, and, you know, we want to have answers to exactly what took place.
What do you want to hear from the Prime Minister?
I want some clarification on.
But what does the clarification look like? What do you mean clarification?
Well,
I've just said to you, the party took place, the Prime Minister has said no rules were broken. Those two things can't be true, and we've had continual denials by ministers and Number 10.
Well, I want some clarity on what's happened, and I think these issues like the video need to be addressed. But as I say, you know, I'm unaware of any external people, MPs like myself, have been invited. You know, we've been working hard with our constituents all the way through this, and have had, you know, pretty tough time. And some of our constituents have had an incredibly tough time. A lot of people have, you know, lost their lives during this pandemic. So I think it's only right that there are answers to these questions which are being raised by the media.
Do you feel let down?
I want to see what the Prime Minister has to say today.
All right, well, let's have a look at what some of the front pages are saying. The Daily Mail, you can see there the then Press Secretary from the video, Allegra Stratton, laughing. A sick joke, they called it. Moment Prime Minister's spokeswoman laughed about illegal party held at Number 10 last Christmas while nation was in lockdown. Let's have a look at the Metro and how they've covered it. Number 10 party clowns. And finally, The Guardian. Prime Minister accused of lying after Number 10 team filmed joking about the party. The Prime Minister accused of lying. That's the heart of it, isn't it, Richard?
Well, the Prime Minister's been clear that, you know, he doesn't think any rules are broken, but I think we need an explanation as to exactly what happened.
Alita, Boris Johnson has his chance to set the record straight at Prime Minister's questions. What do you think he will do?
Well, it's clear to see that, you know, he's going on this warpath of getting his MPs to continue this line of, you know, do not say anything, continue the party line of, you know, ignore until, you know, this seems to blow over. But as we have seen, the story that was initially broke by the Mirror last week is only getting stronger and stronger by the day. I think what public really want to see is an apology. They want to hear an apology. They want to hear MPs coming forward and admitting what went wrong, if anything went wrong, and also to allow the Met Police to investigate these claims if they are saying that, you know, this video that's come through, they would like to know what actually happened. We need the Met Police to investigate this.
Well, they say that they are looking at the video. Clive, it's not suggested that the Prime Minister, or indeed any minister, was at the party at Number 10 last year, but instead it almost looks like the Prime Minister is protecting the people who worked for him who were there. Would you accept that?
It seems like it. And obviously there's form with Dominic Cummings and others of this kind of thing happening, and perhaps you can see why that happened. I think the other thing I think that is really concerning is the fact that we could be going, or we are heading likely into more stringent measures on COVID, which will impinge on people's lives. And people need to have faith in the government that this is being done across the board and that everyone will have to follow those new rules and regulations. It's a big challenge for government to get the public, after 2 years of this, to do that. And this undermines the public's confidence in those who are making the decisions which would impinge and affect their lives in the run-up to Christmas. And so, you know, look, it feels by looking at that video that there's an infrastructure of untruth in this government. And in a democracy, we expect those elected politicians that make decisions on our behalf, we give them the consent to make decisions on everything from policing, even state violence, to be able to make decisions on our behalf. And we expect them to tell us the truth. And that covenant, it seems to me, is being regularly broken, not just by the Prime Minister, but by those around him. And I think that's damaging to our democracy, and it's damaging as we move into the Christmas period and potentially more COVID regulations.
Well, Clive, you've raised this issue about compliance and the sacrifices that people have made. We can now tell you that Whitehall sources have told the BBC that they expect more restrictions to be announced later today. That could include the sort of plan B that the government had talked about, and that would be extending and tighter restrictions for everybody, coming in far quicker than perhaps people had anticipated. How do you think your constituents, what would you say to a constituent of yours who said, I'm not going to comply with any new restrictions? Downing Street doesn't, the government doesn't, why should I?
Well, as Alita said, we're not sure that exactly what happened at the moment, so we need to get some clarity from the government on that. But I think more broadly, we've all been trying our very best to stick to regulations.
I don't think that's exactly what I said.
I certainly have been.
Yeah, but hang on, Richard, you say you don't know what happened. We do know that there was a party. It's been confirmed to us by sources. We have it on good authority. So we do know what happened. And it has to have been in breach of the COVID rules at the time that said parties were banned. So I say to you, just like one of your colleagues, Charles Walker, Conservative MP, says any guidance, any instruction from the government about tighter restrictions can only be advisory because of what's gone on. How damaging is that?
I think it's incredibly important that people stick to guidelines and also regulations. It's something that I've been encouraging my constituents to do throughout. I've been sticking to them throughout in the interests of the broader public health messaging that we need. And I think everybody should stick to them.
But I don't think the issue is with the public at the moment. I think the problem is with the government. The government have shown that time and time again, they themselves are perpetuating this narrative of there's one rule for us and there's one rule for everyone else in the rest of the country. We've seen Dominic Cummings, who's broken lockdown rules. We've seen Matt Hancock, the former health secretary, break rules. Why is it that, they're still pushing on the public to follow rules and it's not them that are necessarily in question here?
Well, any rules that I vote for, I follow.
Right. The difference, it feels to me the difference here, though, is that, look, I've sat on a train, had something to eat, and then hadn't put my mask back on straight away. I mean, look, I'll admit to that. We've all made mistakes on this, but the difference to this is that the government are being dragged, kicking and screaming, once again, this government, this Prime Minister, to tell the truth. Everyone knows that there's an untruth being pushed here, and yet they have failed to do so.
I must bring in Mo. Mo, are we dealing here with the broader question over this government's relationship with the truth?
Yes, I think the truth issue is very important. I think the hypocrisy issue is really important. But actually, this video is really important for another reason. It looks like the government are laughing at us. Nobody likes being taken for a fool, whoever they are in society. It's one of the worst things. And when the public have diligently followed the rules to great expense, cancelling Christmas last year, not seeing loved ones, sometimes, vulnerable people, it might be their last Christmas, a lonely Christmas on their own. And then to see this video where the government appears to be laughing at us and feeling that the rules don't apply to them. I mean, also, what does the government think of its own rules that it so casually undermines them? Are these rules not fit for purpose? So there's lots of questions to be answered. But I think this is really important. We've heard arguments about politicians of all parties lying to us. We've heard arguments about the one rule for them and one rule for us, which applies across the political spectrum. But to kind of see government employees laughing in the face of what has been an incredibly tough 20 months for the general public, I think is really important. I mean, you even had Anton Deck talking about it.
Well, you've mentioned Anton Deck. We're primed, funnily enough, as a TV programme, to show you exactly how this is cutting through. Let's have a look at this.
They didn't have a party. They categorically deny any suggestions that they had a party. And this fictional party definitely didn't involve cheese and wine or a secret Santa.
Evening, Prime Minister! For now.
I mean, Richard, if you had any doubt that the public are paying attention to this story, that it is cutting through, millions of people will have seen that clip on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here last night. What do you say?
Well, you can see it in the front pages in front of us today. I think there are questions to be answered, and I hope that they get answered very quickly.
All right, well, let's show you how it broke. This was the Daily Mirror last week. Boris Johnson broke COVID lockdown rules with Downing Street parties at Xmas. When the country was in the grips of a second lockdown, Prime Minister Boris Johnson allowed a festive party to go ahead in number 10, it has been claimed. Then, over the course of the week, over the past 7 days, we've had a series of denials of sorts. Let's have a look.
Was a Christmas party thrown in Downing Street for dozens of people on December the 18th?
What I can tell the right honourable gentleman is that all guidance was followed completely.
I've been reassured that all guidance was carefully followed as it continually is.
Does that answer your question?
No.
Unsubstantiated anonymous claims being made. The PM has been crystal clear in relation to any circumstances, events in Downing Street that the rules were complied with.
The reassurances I've been given are that none of those rules were broken at Downing Street, that they complied with the COVID regulations at the time.
Are you satisfied yourself that
I
that
have
is the case?
satisfied myself that the guidelines were followed at all times.
OK, a series of denials, Mo. The problem has been the cover-up as much as the original offence, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite telling that the government can't get many people, Richard being an exception, of course, to come on and have answers to the public about this. But it does feel that what could have been just a Westminster bubble story, and there are rumours that there were journalists there as well. This is Westminster Village is a community in and of itself, but also we have communities. We have families, we have social.
We've just lost you momentarily.
Relations trying to capitalise on. We've seen.
No, carry on. I think we've still got you, Mo.
No, but I'm saying what the government has not done, and across the political spectrum, they haven't given the public the wherewithal, granted them the wherewithal to kind of support one another through what has been a terrible crisis. I mean, every time the government brings in a new restriction, there are knock-on effects, there are collateral damage. I've just heard that my grandmother's care home is not accepting visitors at Christmas again. Now, the government hasn't ruled on that, but as soon as they start making legislations, as soon as they start trying to kind of micromanage our lives for us, then other people's, it has kind of knock-on effect. I mean, that's just dreadful for elderly people who are going to face a second Christmas alone in a care home, and it won't be across the board, but it will happen somewhere. And then Gavin Williams having a party when 1.5 million pupils were out of school and not being educated.
Well, once again, Mo, you must have had a look at my notes. We've got that story on the front page of the Mirror, Alita's paper. Another top Tory broke COVID party rules also last year. Tell us about this story and the response from the Department of Education.
Well, it's shocking because as millions of children were facing lockdown rules, millions of children were facing the fact they won't see their friends. They will have to be, with their families. Not everyone is privileged to come from an extremely wealthy background. They don't have massive houses to stay in. So children were having to be doing their homework from their beds in the dark where electricity wasn't always available. These kids really struck out and did the very best they could for themselves. And then we have officials from the education department just having a wine and dine party just because they had a tough time during the pandemic. I think everyone else did. And what's shocking is that on that very day, we've heard from many families who lost their loved ones, many families who weren't able to say goodbye for the last time to their loved ones because they were following the rules. Many people who've been struggling with loneliness. The festive period is a difficult time for many as it is, let alone going through so much, lockdowns and isolation from people.
Right.
What would Boris Johnson say to those families?
And what would you say?
Well, I was in exactly that situation with my own grandmother last year, actually. On the specifics of this regarding Department of Education, I'm at the Public Accounts Committee later today, and I'll be quizzing the Permanent Secretary and the other Director Generals of the department on exactly what happened and how it happened, because I don't think it's acceptable.
You don't? And do you think people should resign over this?
Well, let's just see. Let's ask the questions first. The Permanent Secretary will be before us this afternoon.
Clive, Keir Starmer's response to this has been to demand the Prime Minister explain what happened and apologise. I mean, there are Tory MPs who seem angrier than the Labour leader. I mean, Ian Blackford, the SNP leader at Westminster, has said Boris Johnson should consider his position. Should Keir Starmer have done the same?
I think Boris Johnson should consider his position. And look, maybe we'll see that today at PMQs, where he will say that the scale of this cover-up, I can't think of any other word now, demands that the Prime Minister take responsibility for this. I think there's real public anger out there, and it will only grow. There's a saying in Glasgow, it's not the crime you go down for, but the cover-up. And I think this is corrosive, and people will be angry. You can see it's cutting through to the mainstream, the public outside the Westminster bubble. And I think ultimately there'll be a lot of Tory MPs, some present company included, who will be very, very deeply uncomfortable about this situation.
And should Keir Starmer be angrier himself about it? And should he be showing that to the public?
I think Keir has a particular way of coming across. And if he does come across as angry, then so be it. But, look, at the end of the day, I think he's trying to cut through in a forensic way to what Boris Johnson has said and done or not said and done. And that's the right thing. Ultimately, the public want to see answers on this, not theatrics. And I think getting the answers is the key thing here, and showing this cover-up for what it is, which is a tawdry situation.
All right, well, let's see if we can catch up with what restrictions we could expect later on today, as is being talked about and reported. The BBC's Kath Burns is in Coventry. Kath, tell us why you're in Coventry, first of all.
I'm in Coventry because it was exactly this time last year that the vaccine rollout started. Remember, Maggie Keenan had that first of many vaccines, and now we're at 118 million doses. But as you know, as you've been talking about, we are dealing with a sting in the tail here, the Omicron variant. So that's why I'm here.
Right. Now, in terms of restrictions, I might be able to show a tweet from the BBC's political editor, obviously you stay with us, that says growing expectations in SW1, government also about to move to push button on some extra COVID restrictions. Nothing confirmed, but turning out to be quite the day. Hashtag PMQs in an hour. Kath, what are you hearing? What would those extra restrictions look like?
Well, if you remember, back at sort of the early autumn, the government set out its winter plan. But really, essentially, it was winter plans, because there was a plan A and a plan B. And this, I think, will be the plan B. So the kind of thing we'll be looking out for. Will there be a recommendation to work from home? Will the use of masks be extended? And will there be some kind of COVID vaccine passport? This is the kind of thing that's going to be on the table today. And also, today is the day for those over 40 to be able to book their booster. Just give us the details on that. So this is going to affect about 7 million people in England, people who have had their COVID, over 40s, who've had one vaccine, they're 2 COVID vaccines, but maybe not quite 6 months ago. Now that's going to be cut to 3 months. And the booster programme, really, this is where the focus is on right now. And there has been some criticism that maybe it's a little bit slow coming out. But actually, if you compare us to other countries, we're doing incredibly well.
All right, Kath Burns there in Coventry, thank you very much. Obviously, we'll bring you any notification of any restrictions coming our way later on in the programme. There are other serious questions for Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, this morning on a different issue, but also about whether he has been completely straight with the public. You'll remember yesterday we talked about Pen Farthing, who runs an animal charity, and an evacuation mission to get animals and his staff out of Kabul at the time the Taliban was taking over in Afghanistan. There's a picture of him with one of his dogs. Yesterday, at a Foreign Office Select Committee hearing, senior diplomats repeatedly insisted that pets had not been prioritised over people in the evacuation from Afghanistan, and Boris Johnson himself dismissed it as nonsense. But Labour MP Chris Bryant produced a letter from the Prime Minister's parliamentary aide to the charity boss Pen Farthing, confirming flights for his staff and animals. You can see that letter there from Trudy Harrison. It says the Secretary of State has confirmed that animals under the care of Nowzad can be evacuated on a separate chartered flight. The Ministry of Defence will ensure a flight slot is available. Let's just listen to what Chris Bryant said and asked those senior civil servants.
My understanding of what you were trying to tell us was that there was absolutely there was no priority given by any minister. Nobody got involved in any shape or form. It was all just separately arranged, like some kind of miracle, after all the evacuation plans had happened. But actually, 68 members of staff were guaranteed flights on an RAF flight. That is a priority for a particular set of people who were not the other priorities. And on top of that, the PPS for the Prime Minister is writing to notify Pen Farthing of that. The Prime Minister's fingers are all over this, aren't they? And you're just trying... I'm hesitant to use the word cover up, but that's what it feels like.
Well, you can see the frustration there on Chris Bryant's face. Richard, does it feel like a cover up to you?
Well, so I saw the letter from Trudy. I had a look at it, and it seemed pretty clear to me that the concentration was on evacuating the people, which is, I think, what's been the case throughout. And I do have to pay massive tribute to the huge military effort which did get all those people out. Now, there's a separate point in that letter about a chartered flight coming in. Now, that's obviously... that's a different matter, but that's not British resources being used to put on it.
Right, but should there have been any involvement at number 10? I mean, she is, Trudy Harrison, a parliamentary aide to the Prime Minister, organising in any way animals and staff of a charity to be evacuated at a time when soldiers and Afghan refugees were fleeing Kabul and needed to get on those planes.
Well, so my understanding is exactly as you say, that this was about getting the people out, which I think is what...
and the animals under the care of that charity.
Well, no, that wasn't on RAF planes, and I think
but I think we both know that the chartered flight, whether it was RAF or not, would have required serious personnel on the ground to make sure that it's landed, put through, processed, and then took off. That's people working on a flight, a chartered flight, yes, for animals who aren't working on getting people out. There were 150,000 people that applied to come to. We got 7,500 people out, less than 5%. Yes. Fantastic, but there are people now who we left behind, who could have been on that plane, who we now believe to have been murdered. It's complete outrage. And I'm trying to see the link between Nowzad and the PPS in Cumbria. I can see no link between Nowzad and the PPS in Cumbria. We were told by the government that this was nothing more than a constituency matter that she was dealing with. What is the link to Cumbria and her constituency with Nowzad? I can't find one. So, look, again, I was going to say another day, another scandal, another potential cover-up. It's another hour. And we've got 2 potential cover-ups and scandals and lying taking place. And of course, it's just a serial situation of just constant lies and cover-ups. And this government is now finding itself in a really, really difficult situation where the public has so little trust in it.
There's quite clearly no seats on RAF planes given up to anybody who we shouldn't have been getting out there. And, if other planes are chartered, that's one thing. But the truth is that we were concentrating on getting people out.
Right, and do you believe the Prime Minister when he said it's nonsense that he was involved?
I don't understand. There's no suggestion in that letter that the Prime Minister was involved.
Well, he's PPS.
So you do believe him or you don't believe him?
No, I 100% believe him.
Mo, what do you think people will make of this?
Well, I think it's the other great thing, isn't it, that the Tory government has been plagued with alongside the hypocrisy thing. It's that cronyism. So if there is a suggestion that the Prime Minister has made an exception, or even his wife, for instance, has made an exception for a friend that has a very personal charitable aim, then I think that's not going to play very well. And what I think is a real shame is that this is a government that was elected with an 80-seat majority. It had an incredibly a huge amount of goodwill. And I remember when Boris Johnson stood on the steps of Downing Street and said, I know that people have loaned us their vote, people who don't... the government, vote for this government, and it feels like they're squandering it day by day by day by not being honest with the public, honest with themselves, and acting from a sense of principle or integrity. And I think that is a very deep issue. Now, I don't necessarily see that the other parties are any loftier in that respect, but it is the government that's in charge, and it's them that we want to hold to account. So, so I think this is obviously, as we know, a bad week for the government. I think what's also worth saying, Jo, is both of these stories this last day, in fact, have come from leaks from within the civil service, within government themselves. That's something quite telling as well. You said whether Keir Starmer's response has been strong enough. Yeah. A lot of the criticism of Boris Johnson seems to be coming from within the Conservative Party itself. This is an interesting development.
Yeah, well, what do you say about that, Clive?
But look, I think we'll see at PMQs, and we'll see whether Keir Starmer goes back on this. I hope he does, and I hope he kind of...
Surely he is going to be talking about...
I'm not a mystic. I can't see into the future. I don't have a crystal ball, but I would like to think he would. But, I mean, this goes to something that when I was younger, my dad used to tell me, his mum told him. I remember I told a lie to my dad, and he said, you know where you stand with a murderer, you know where you stand with a thief, you don't know where you stand with a liar, and I need to be able to trust you as you grow up through life. And I think this is the problem now for the government. Whether Boris Johnson's fingerprints all over this Nowzad issue or not, it's the public perception that there's a Prime Minister who has a socially distanced relationship with the truth, as I think it's been described. And I think that's problematic now for government, and it corrodes people's trust, not just in this government, but in our democracy, and that, for me, is problematic.
What's your reaction, Lita, to the idea, as Mo has said, and I was questioning Clive earlier, about that actually most of the most vociferous attacks, criticism of the government and the questioning of Boris Johnson's relationship with the truth has come from within the Conservative Party and not from Her Majesty's loyal opposition?
It's just showing that the fact that, Boris Johnson as a leader is losing his grip. We knew what he was like as a person before he entered government. Set that aside, a leader shapes his government. Margaret Thatcher, for what she was, whether people agree with her views or not, had certain morals, and she kept order within her party and order, to a degree, within the country. But there were no allegations of lying flying around. At the moment, it's just disappointing to see that, we have a leader who people just cannot trust. People do not know where to look to turn to for some sort of leadership. They don't know what to do in terms of following rules.
Do you think people are questioning that vote that they gave to the Conservative Party and to Boris Johnson in 2019 on the back of all of this?
Look, they voted Conservative in 2019 for several reasons, but I think the government is delivering on those big priorities. We have delivered Brexit. We are starting to really transform with the levelling up agenda. You can see the amount of effort that's been put in through the COVID pandemic, Britain leading the world, not just in the vaccine rollout, but now in the booster rollout.
Yeah, and as a result of what's happened over the last few weeks, anything from the sleaze allegations around Owen Paterson to the Downing Street Christmas party to animals taking priority over people. What do you think this is doing to people's confidence in your government?
On the big issues, I think...
Are these not big issues?
The government is on the right side of them. There will always be issues which arise, but I think on the big things, which I was voted for at the general election to help deliver, I think we're absolutely on the right side of them all.
All right, well, let's talk about one of those issues and legislation that's going through Parliament at the moment. It's the debate over the new Nationality and Borders Bill, described by the government as a plan, in their words, to fix the broken asylum system. It's been dominated in part by disagreement over new Clause 9, which would allow the Home Secretary to remove citizenship from someone without notice. That is already an existing power in terms of removing or revoking citizenship, but not without notice. Let's have a look at our guest Clive Lewis's tweet here in response. Just take that in. Powers to summarily remove your citizenship. How is that ever going to end well for any of us? Read a history book if you're in any doubt. Clive, this is a continuation of a policy that was started under the Labour Party.
And it was a completely wrong policy. And I think ultimately, I said look at history. For where people have had their citizenship removed. I'd say arguably mid-20th century Central Europe, if you want to see how governments have taken that to an extreme. Look, we live in a democracy, theoretically, and it requires us as citizens to, and this is something I believe strongly in, we have a government that doesn't believe that we have a right to citizenship, that it's a privilege. And yet that privilege is determined by the Crown that has sovereignty and the ministers that exercise that. I do not believe that anyone who is a citizen of this country should be able to have their citizenship struck off by a Crown Minister.
In any circumstance, hang on, the Home Office says deprivation of citizenship on conducive grounds is rightly reserved for those who pose a threat to the UK or whose conduct involves very high harm. Will you accept that actually a lot of people, perhaps most people, might think that that makes sense?
So, no. Some people may, but I disagree with them. Citizenship is not something to be bargained, not something to be used as a threat. It's something that you have, it's a right. And I'll explain why. Because ultimately, what this is about, it's like human rights, OK? It's a right. And it's about the fact that everyone has it. And citizenship, in my opinion, is a right. And this is the thing here. If you start with people who you call terrorists, and then you move to people who you find disaffect public life. Then it moves on to people who you disagree with. It's a slippery slope. And so there's a principle here at stake.
All right, well,
and if you allow Priti Patel to do this, then it's maybe not her, but someone in the future who will take this, twist it, and push it on. And that would affect all of us, not just people who have dual citizenship.
Right. What do you say in defence of this clause and more broadly the principle of the Home Secretary to be
I think Clive questioning the fact that we live in a democracy is quite telling actually about Clive's general politics. I think more broadly, if people are attacking this country, if they've gone to fight for foreign powers, I think it's only right that we remove their citizenship. They've basically disowned this country in doing that. And I can't quite, I just think Labour are on the wrong side of this, just like they're on the wrong side of voting for extra cash for the NHS a few weeks ago. I think on the big issues, Labour are on the wrong side of everything. And I think on this, Clive is again on the wrong side.
Where do you send some? So what? So someone who both their parents born in this country, goes abroad to fight for a foreign power, and you're saying you're going to withdraw their citizenship. Where are you going to send them? Exactly.
I don't think we should. I don't think we should be bringing them back to the UK if they've gone to fight for ISIS, Clive. I don't think we should be bringing them back to the UK. I don't think we should be bringing those people back at all.
That's not your. It shouldn't be down to you. It shouldn't be your call or some minister. This isn't something that you should be giving the power to an individual to do.
Well, hang on. The power's already there. Let's be clear. The power's already there.
This is a very.
Clive wants to go back on where the Labour Party even was a few years ago, which was at least back in the day they were robust on some of these issues around Britain's national security. They seem to have gone totally wobbly over it.
It's not about being wobbly. It's about it's about defending our liberties and our rights, which this government.
Yes. What about the rights of the people who are here?
This is about liberties.
But the rights of the people who are here, not to have terrorists walking amongst them.
Don't shout over each other because people can't hear. Let me bring in Mo and Alita. Listening to this discussion, Mo, people will remember the case of Shamima Begum, who was the young girl who went to join ISIS and now wants to be reconsidered. She had her citizenship stripped away. What do you make of what the government would say is an extension of an existing power?
Well, it is an extension of the citizenship. It is the fundamental defining relationship between the state and the individual. That's what it is, and we don't talk about it nearly enough. Now, the idea that you can grant citizenship easily and you can take it away easily seems to me to really undermine what that principle is. So in the case of Shamima Begum, what she did, and Richard's right, she undermined that relationship to the state that she had citizenship with. But she is a citizen of this state, and therefore she is our problem. So I understand there's there's not a great public appetite for bringing Shamima Begum back. But the thing you have to consider with all of these principles is, can you universalise them? And when we start kind of treating citizenship as if it is a privilege and not something that actually defines where we are as an individual with the state that we belong to, then I think we've got some serious problems.
All right, Richard.
I think there are important rights and responsibilities which come with being a citizen. I think one of the key ones of those is not going to fight for a foreign power which throws gay people off buildings and sets people on fire in cages. I think that's a perfectly reasonable position to hold. I can understand that the modern Labour Party doesn't hold that position, but it's one that I will stick to.
But just taking Shamima Begum aside, this is obviously going to apply to, ordinary citizens, people that haven't necessarily committed these sorts of atrocities.
In very extreme circumstances.
In extreme circumstances,
the Home Office said, it reserves that right.
And since 2018, we've seen the government slowly introducing this Clause 9, which will give them, as we have established, the right to slowly or just sneakily remove people's...
No, I don't think hang on. Sneakily. No, this is in extreme circumstances where people are basically have abandoned their... I would argue that they've abandoned their citizenship
It's sneaks because they're not notified and they're not given the right to appeal that.
If you're in a foreign country under ISIS rule, you can hardly send them a nice letter in advance.
As I said, we're taking that extremity aside and we're looking at the general public.
All right, just finally, just to remind people that power, Home Office powers to strip British nationals of their citizenship were introduced after the 2005 London bombings under New Labour. And you can understand why people would think that was a proportionate response.
You can, and I understand people's fear and anger, but some decisions aren't best made in an environment of fear and anger. And I think it's disingenuous for politicians to equate what violent, homophobic, awful organisations, as has been mentioned, terrorist organisations get up to, and then simply use that and move over to say, and that therefore gives conditionality to our citizenship. We know, if you look at the New Statesman, 6.6 million people could be affected by this legislation.
I mean, that's absolute nonsense.
And the vast majority of them...
Drivel.
No, you probably were saying the same thing about Windrush, but that was a reality of what your government did, and that's
what happened to my mouth, Clive. Okay. No, I certainly wasn't. And I think the issue here at stake is whether people have to be notified in advance. Some of these people cannot be notified in advance. If you're in Syria and you're fighting for ISIS a couple of years ago, you could not be notified in advance. I think it makes a mockery of the situation.
But after this week, can the public really trust the government to, really follow that rule and only use that when it's absolutely necessary, only not notify them?
All right, well, on that basis of whether the government can be trusted, I just want to return to this issue because, again, there is much discussion going on in Westminster about new restrictions coming in. Do you support new restrictions coming in, COVID restrictions?
I want to see what the government announces today. I think it's important that we have
It would be working from home guidance, wouldn't it? That would be one of the big changes, and vaccine passports in certain settings.
I think we need a a measured response to this. It's quite clear that we're not exactly sure where we are with the Omicron variant at the moment. I think we're still looking at that, but I think it's right to take a cautious approach.
Would you support those sorts of restrictions, the Plan B that I've just talked about, Clive?
Yes, but I'd also want to make sure that those who don't have a choice whether they work from home are also supported, proper sick pay, proper rights at work to be able to isolate and socially distance. But also as a country, we need to ensure that we understand that this will not be solved unless we vaccinate the rest of the world as well. And we have been woefully inadequate.
And you will support vaccine passports being...
No, I won't support that.
Right, well, that would be part of it was Plan B.
Well, I won't. Well, there are other parts of it, but not vaccine passports. Because
about...
the evidence against vaccine passports is that they're actually counterproductive and it's illiberal. I do not like the concept. And actually, the way that you encourage people to take their vaccines is by saying this is something that will support your community, your family, your country. That's the best way of approaching it.
All right, let's talk about the storms that have hit various parts of the country. Thousands of homes have been without power for an extraordinary 10, 11 days. I think most homes have power back, but that was Storm Arwen. Then we had Storm Barra. That hit the UK yesterday with strong winds and flood warnings now in place in 28 locations across the country. Richard, you've written in Conservative Home, snap pylons, ice, falling trees and no power for days on end. Would the home counties be treated like this? What do you mean?
I think I was... the question I've been raising is that, part of my constituents are without power for 11 days. There's often a question of different parts of the country get different responses. I've been particularly annoyed by elements of the response from Northern Power Grid. They didn't inform the local council, who run the local resilience forum, that they'd taken internally, that they declared a emergency situation for 5 days, which meant that the local council then couldn't ask for central government assistance. I am glad that now, and that the Secretary of State yesterday said that he wants compensation to be paid to my constituents within 10 days. He's really pressuring on that. I'm glad that the council have been stepping up. I'm glad that the Army's been there. But, there is a definite issue, I think, with Northern Power Grid, and that's why I'm very glad that Bayes and Ofgem are doing a proper investigation to this, because we cannot have this situation happening again.
No, we've seen the pictures of the devastation that has hit your constituents and many others. But this charge that you don't think it would have happened down south, what do you mean precisely? What would have been different, do you think?
No, I think that, so if you read the article, the point I was making is that too often it's a go-to that, well, things down south would be different. And we are in a different situation in the north of England. The rolling North Pennine Hills are different to, the central London, the Essex coast or wherever. But I do think that in this instance, there is something in the fact that the North was treated differently. I don't think Northern Power Grid would have been able to get away with what they did get away with, not notifying local authorities for 5 days, and we cannot let it happen again.
Right. I mean, Clive, do you think this would have happened in your constituency in Norwich? No power for 12 days after a storm?
It's a city, so possibly less likely, but given the rest of Norfolk, given the fact that it has a history of underinvestment from the state, from the government, it wouldn't surprise me if the rest of Norfolk experience something like this at some point. What I would say is, again, as someone who believes in public ownership of these assets, critical state assets, critical assets for all of us, we need them to get on with our lives. This is the company. We know that some of those repairs weren't done because some of the infrastructure was so old, they couldn't find the spares. So, this is the private company sucking out extractive organisations, sucking out profit that should have been invested back into the infrastructure of your constituency. Instead, it's gone to shareholders and not into public investment where it should have gone.
Mo, it was the worst storm for 20 years in the North East. Is there actually that much that can be done by central government in the face of extreme weather events like this?
Well, I think that hits the nub of it. I mean, it was actually quite terrifying. I was in the eye of the storm myself, and, there are fences down, trees down everywhere. I didn't myself lose power, but know people that did. And, it took a week to deploy backup generators in some places. And I'm glad Tim Farron and I'm glad Richard raised it fairly soon within the House of Commons. Perhaps it could have been even sooner. But well done for them for doing that, and the local resilience forum being able to come into force there. I mean, what Clive's saying about the utilities being privatised, if there's an efficiency there and if there can be due accountability, but the problem is there's no way that the government has kind of any jurisdiction over this. So when the power power companies are not working in the national interest, then there's a gap there, isn't there? And the fact that, you know, people without power for so long and so many people just shows that there is a gap there.
Right. Should there be a public inquiry into the response? Mo?
Yeah, well, yes, but I think it's more immediate than that, because there are still people without power on. So, OK, public inquiries are OK, and they take a long time. Sometimes the lessons need to be learnt now and learnt fast, because, you know, we're going to have more storms before an inquiry comes in.
Richard?
No, I think the argument around a public inquiry or not, a public inquiry, a formal public inquiry could take years. I think the inquiry that's been launched between Ofgem and BEIS, looking at it quickly. You know, we've got more storms coming. We've just had Storm Barras. You know, that's fortunately not caused widespread issues in my constituency, but only yesterday power finally returned for some families, and there are still generators there, and still some of that wire work is having to be done over the next few weeks. So there is still an ongoing issue there, but I think we need to find out the issues really quickly. But most of all, my constituents, if they've had to spend money, need cash in their pockets before Christmas.
Very quickly.
Very quickly.
Very quickly. We're spending, you know, the Climate Change Committee has said we need to spend 1% of GDP a year on our infrastructure to green it and to make it sustainable. We're spending 0.01%. So that should tell you everything you need to know.
All right, well, Prime Minister's Questions is on its way. Let's just show you inside the chamber. It is packed, unsurprisingly, although actually there are a few gaps I can see there, my eyesight failing me there, on the right-hand side on the green benches there. But no doubt everybody keenly waiting for questions from Keir Starmer to the Prime Minister. As I said earlier in the programme, Richard, perhaps the biggest difficulty for Boris Johnson today will be the reaction behind him from you and from others. What do you think, and how should he handle it?
Well, I think he just needs to be calm and straightforward with people. He usually is. And I think he also needs to really concentrate on the big issues which are affecting the country. We've discussed a few of them today, but I really think that that's what he needs to do, and just lay it out as it is and as he understands it to be today.
Have you got a sense of your fellow backbenchers and how they're feeling?
I think, you know, there's always going to be a bit of mid-term issues in any government, but I think generally we feel that we're on the right page on so many big issues, whether it's transport investment, extra cash for the NHS, that sort of thing. I think those are the big issues which are really important, but I think that's what we want to get back to be able to concentrate on.
All right, and what about Keir Starmer? Sometimes when there is that sort of metaphorical open goal, it can be difficult.
You can fluff it. Yeah, it's true. You can. I have confidence that Keir will nail it today.
All right, well, on that basis, I think it is time for Prime Minister's Questions. I can see the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, looking quizzical. Actually, no, it looks as if there's a question before we go in. Alita, what do you think both men need to do?
I think Keir just needs to be Keir Starmer, as he always is, and just lay into the Prime Minister and explain, like, what he needs to. And I think Boris Johnson owes the public an apology.
Back of the net.
Right. Mo? I think we've lost you, and I think it is time to go into the chamber for Prime Minister's Questions. Here's Boris Johnson.
I begin by saying that I understand and share the anger up and down the country at seeing Number 10 staff seeming to make light of lockdown measures. And I can understand how infuriating it must be to think that the people who have been setting the rules have not been following the rules, Mr. Speaker, because I was also furious to see that clip. And, Mr. Speaker, I apologise unreservedly for the offence that it has caused up and down the country, and I apologise for the impression that it gives. But I repeat, Mr. Speaker, that I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken, and that is what I have been repeatedly assured. But I have asked the Cabinet Secretary to establish all the facts and to report back as soon as possible. And, Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that if those rules were broken, then there will be disciplinary action for all those involved. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. Speaker, bins left uncollected, council tenants being forced to live in damp and cold homes, £22 million lost on Providence Place land deal and a £10 million overspend on SEND transport contracts which were almost awarded to Labour councillors' friends. Today the council's external auditors released a damning report that surprises none of us. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that 47 years of Labour control in Sandwell has done nothing but level down my constituency of West Bromwich East, and that my constituents in West Bromwich, Friar Park and Great Bar deserve better?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend, because the instinct of Labour councillors up and down this country is yet again to level down rather than to level up. And I encourage her constituents to install a Labour council there as soon as possible, a Conservative council there as soon as possible, Mr. Speaker.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I heard what the Prime Minister said at the beginning of this session, but frankly, it raises more questions than answers. Last week, I asked the Prime Minister, was there a Christmas party in Downing Street for dozens of people on December the 18th? The Prime Minister, the government, spent the week telling the British public there was no party. All guidance was followed completely. Millions of people now think the Prime Minister was taking them for fools and that they were lied to. They're right, aren't they?
Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman probably missed what I said at the beginning, but I apologise. I apologise for the impression that has been given that staff in Downing Street take this less than seriously. I'm sickened myself and furious about that. But I repeat what I have said to him, that I've been repeatedly assured that the rules were not broken.
Order. And right, well, let's just do a little less, Prime Minister. It's important.
Speaker. Asked the Cabinet Secretary to investigate exactly what happened, and I repeat that there will be consequences for those involved if those rules were broken, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
An internal investigation into what happened. The situation is as clear as day. I thought last week was... Mr. Speaker, I thought last week was bad enough. Surely the Prime Minister isn't now going to start pretending that the first he knew about this was last night. Surely.
It's in his own house.
We've all watched the video of the Prime Minister's staff, including his personal spokesperson. They knew there was a party. They knew it was against the rules. They knew they couldn't admit it, and they thought it was funny. It's obvious what happened. Anton Decker ahead of the Prime Minister on this. The Prime Minister has been caught red-handed. Why doesn't he end the investigation right now by just admitting it?
Because, Mr. Speaker, I've been repeatedly assured that no rules were broken, Mr. Speaker, and they may not. I understand public anxiety about this, and I understand public indignation. But there is a risk of doing a grave injustice to people who are frankly obeying the rules, Mr. Speaker. That is why the Cabinet Secretary will be conducting an investigation, and that's why there will be the requisite disciplinary action if necessary.
Keir Starmer.
This pretends that further information's come to light. Give me a break. He's still taking the public for fools. On the day of the Downing Street party, Tricia Greenhall's mum phoned her. She was breathless and feverish. You might want to listen. Tricia followed the rules and didn't visit her mum. Listening? 4 days later, on the day the Prime Minister's staff laughed about covering up the party, Tricia's mum was admitted to hospital. Tricia followed the rules and didn't visit. Tricia's mum spent Christmas Day in hospital. Tricia followed the rules and didn't visit. 2 days later, Tricia's mum died. What Tricia wants to know is this: why did the Prime Minister expect her to accept that the rules allowed a Downing Street party but didn't allow her to visit her dying mother.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the first thing to say is that, in common with everybody in this House, I extend my sympathies to the family of Tricia, and of course I understand to Tricia and our family, and I understand the pain of everybody who has suffered throughout this pandemic. And I know that the implication that he is trying to draw, that the case that we're now investigating somehow should undermine public confidence in the measures that we're taking. I think that's the point that he's trying to make. But I may say to him, Mr. Speaker, I think it is a great mistake to try to play politics with this issue. And I think that is what he is doing. I think that is what he is doing. And the public, Mr. Speaker, will not like to see, I don't think the public do want to see confidence in their measures, in these measures undermined. And we are taking, I think they can see the difference, Mr. Speaker. We are taking the steps necessary to protect the public, above all, Mr. Speaker, by rolling out the vaccinations, and rather than focusing on the events of a year ago, Mr. Speaker, that is what we are focusing on, and that is what I think the public will understand.
Keir Starmer. But it's not just the events of a year ago, is it? We are facing a new variant. Yep. We may well be in Plan B this afternoon. Even the Prime Minister, must understand the damage he's done to his credibility in enforcing the rules now and in the future. Exactly. Tricia made an enormous personal sacrifice to do the right thing, to follow the rules and help defeat the virus. That's what she was asked to do. Most people were just like Tricia last Christmas. No one was dreaming of a Zoom Christmas, turkey dinners for one, gifts exchanged at service stations. But the virus was out of control. 489 people died of COVID on the day of the Downing Street party. So the British people put the health of others above themselves and followed the rules. Isn't the Prime Minister ashamed that his Downing Street couldn't do the same?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I've said what I've said about the events on December the 18th. They will be properly investigated, and Mr. Speaker, I will place a copy of the Cabinet Secretary's report in the library of the House of Commons. But what people should not do is lose focus on what we are trying to do now. Rather than, of course, we will deal with the events of what may or may not have taken place on the 18th of December last year, Mr. Speaker. But what I think we need to focus on today is what we're doing to roll out the vaccinations across this country, and what we're doing to protect the public. And he is indeed right, Mr. Speaker, that we now have in the Omicron variant, a variant that is spreading much faster, Mr. Speaker, than any variant that we've seen before. And that is what we need, with great respect to the right honourable gentleman, to focus on. And that is why I ask everybody to go and get their booster jab as soon as they're called forward.
Starmer. The Prime Minister apparently wants us to focus on what's happening today. There were no government spokespersons on the media this morning. I see the Health Secretary has made it to the chamber. And that's the point, Mr. Speaker. This virus isn't defeated. We're going to face other tests where the British people may be asked by their leaders to make further sacrifices for the greater good. Her Majesty the Queen sat alone when she marked the passing of the man she'd been married to for 73 years. Leadership, sacrifice, that's what gives leaders the moral authority to lead. Does the Prime Minister think he has the moral authority to lead and to ask the British people to stick to the rules?
Not only that, Mr. Speaker, but the Labour Party and the Labour leader in particular have played politics, Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic.
I've got to hear what the Prime Minister is saying, because if I don't know when something is said, and I must hear the Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and if I may say so, throughout this pandemic, the Leader of the Opposition in particular has done nothing but play politics to try to muddy the waters, to confuse the public and to cause needless confusion about the guidance. The public, Mr. Speaker, have not been so confused, and they have not been fooled. and they have got on with implementing the guidance, and they have got on in particular, Mr. Speaker, with showing great commitment to the health of this country by going forward to get vaccinated.
Order. Prime Minister. Mr. Streeting, we've had this the week before. I'm not having this every week. No, if you want to be on the front bench, behave like you're meant to be there. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, at every stage, the Labour leadership and the right honourable gentleman have tried to muddy the waters and to play politics, whereas the people of this country have not been fooled. And in particular, they have come forward to get vaccinated faster than any other country in Europe. We've now done 20 million boosters, Mr. Speaker. That is the single best thing that we can do, and I encourage everybody to keep going and get their booster jab.
That's so desperate, and even his own side can see it. Last week, the Prime Minister told us there was no party. Now he thinks there's something to investigate. The Justice Secretary thinks that the police don't investigate crimes from a year ago. Well, I ran the Crown Prosecution Service, and I can tell him that is total nonsense. Mr. Speaker, at Westminster Magistrates Court, right now, the CPS are prosecuting over a dozen breaches of COVID restrictions last December, including those, Prime Minister, who hosted parties. They're doing their job, enforcing the law set in Downing Street. Will the Prime Minister support the police and support the CPS by handing over everything the government knows about parties in Downing Street to the Metropolitan Police?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, of course we will do that, and we will get on with the investigation by the Cabinet Secretary. Mr. Speaker, he continually wants to play politics with this issue. We want to get on with our job of protecting this country during the pandemic, and Mr. Speaker, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, fighting the drugs gangs, Mr. Speaker, when the party opposite wants to decriminalise Class A drugs, Mr. Speaker, and backing our borders bill, Mr. Speaker. They have an opportunity to focus on that tonight. Why not back our borders bill, Mr. Speaker, and have life sentences for people traffickers? That's what the Leader of the Opposition should be doing. That's what I urge you, rather than playing politics.
Fiona Bruce.
Yeah. As we celebrate the advent of Christmas, I thank the Prime Minister for his support for Christians and those of other faiths and beliefs who face persecution across the world. We here stand with them. The government has talked about the gift of resettlement for Afghans who are members of religious minorities, of those at risk of persecution, targeted for their beliefs. Will this gift of resettlement be available by the end of Christmas?
Prime Minister.
I thank her very much for everything that she does, particularly as a special envoy for freedom of religion and belief. As she rightly says, we have an Afghan citizens resettlement scheme coming. We've already taken 15,000, but it's important that we get that scheme right, Mr. Speaker, and further details, including the eligibility criteria, will be announced in due course by the Home Office.
I now call the Leader of the SNP, Ian Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are standing on the cliff edge of yet another challenging moment in this pandemic. Omicron cases are rising at a rapid rate over the coming weeks. Tough decisions will again have to be made to save lives and protect our NHS. Mr. Speaker, trust in leadership is a matter of life and death. Downing Street willfully broke the rules and mocked the sacrifices we have all made, shattering the public's trust. The Prime Minister is responsible for losing the trust of the people. He can no longer lead on the most pressing issue facing these islands. The Prime Minister has a duty, the only right and moral choice left to him. It is for his resignation. When can we expect it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the party opposite, and indeed the other party opposite, are going to continue to play politics. I am going to get on with the job.
Ian Blackford.
No dignity from a Prime Minister that quite simply just doesn't get it. Mr. Speaker, people across these islands have followed the rules, even when it meant missing friends and family, missing births, missing funerals, missing the chance to be beside a loved one in their dying moments. People have sacrificed, at times to the point of breaking, while the UK government has laughed in our faces. It is clear that this Prime Minister has lost the support of the public and now even his own benches. This is not a grin and bear it moment. This is a moment of moral reckoning. Every member of the Conservative benches must now decide, is this the man to lead these islands when lives are at stake? It is clear that this Prime Minister intends to desperately cling on to power, and I have nothing left to say to a man whose answers we simply can't trust. So, Mr. Speaker,
Order. I will hear this question, whether the front bench like it or not. Can I just say, I'm expecting better behaviour. The public out there are questioning this Parliament. Don't answer that question. Ian Blackford.
Questioning this Parliament and questioning this Prime Minister that we cannot trust. It is clear that the Prime Minister desperately is clinging on to power, and I've got nothing left to say to a man who we simply cannot trust. So, Mr. Speaker, it is time for members in this House to act. If he doesn't resign, then he must be removed.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his vote of support and thanks, vote of confidence. But I can tell him that I am going to get on with the job, and I believe that that is what is the right thing to do. And I think it is very, very sad that when the public need to hear clarity from their officials and from politicians, the parties opposite are trying to muddy the waters about events or non-events of a year ago, Mr. Speaker, and that is what they are doing today.
We now have a closed question. Bob Seeley.
Number 5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, who is an excellent champion for the Isle of Wight, and I know there is ongoing discussion between Isle of Wight and the Department for Levelling Up about the unique circumstances of the island, including the discussions about the possibility of a county deal.
Bob Seeley.
I thank the Prime Minister for his response. Will the government accept the findings of the independent study that it itself commissioned this summer into a long-term, fair funding settlement for the island, the final calculations of which are due imminently? And in doing so, will he help me to right a wrong which has been ongoing now for the island, for my constituents, for some 6 decades? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend very much. He will understand it's not easy to break down the costs that apply to the service delivery on the island, but I know the Department is carefully considering the details of the study he mentions, and I'm sure the relevant minister will keep him updated.
Sir Geoffrey Donalds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In view of the harm caused to political stability in Northern Ireland and to our economy by the Northern Ireland Protocol, noting the lack of progress in removing the Irish Sea border, and recognising that Unionist consent for the Protocol is not forthcoming, what urgent steps does the Prime Minister and his government intend to take to honour his commitment to restore Northern Ireland's place fully within the UK internal market and to safeguard the political institutions in Northern Ireland?
Prime Minister.
I thank the right honourable gentleman, and he and I have discussed this extensively, and he knows that we share a view that the protocol is not working in the way that it needs to in order to guarantee the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. I don't believe things need to be that way. I think it could be worked differently, and we want our EU friends and partners to understand that, and we will continue to work with them to get them to see things in the way that people on both sides of the Irish Sea see them. But in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we do not remove the possibility of invoking Article 16 to protect trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, thousands of my Hindu constituents and millions worldwide start the birth centenary celebrations of the birth of His Holiness PMQ Maharaj. His life was given over to people of all castes, races and religions. He was, of course, the inspiration behind the world-renowned Neasden Temple and hundreds of other temples. Will my right honourable friend join me in joining that celebration and giving good wishes to all Hindus across the world?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for raising this, and I was delighted, and I thank the Hindu community for their amazing contribution to this country. I was delighted to visit Neasden Temple last month and to hear about all they've done during the pandemic, and I wish everybody in that community and all those celebrating all the very best.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The chaos of this government is a distraction from the serious decisions it should be taking. We all know that the Chinese government denies basic human rights to China's minority religious communities. The repression of the predominantly Muslim Uyghur population in Xinjiang has been condemned as an act of genocide. In the face of these abuses, President Biden has decided US diplomats will boycott the Beijing Olympics. New Zealand and Australia have followed suit. It's International Human Rights Day on Friday, so will the Prime Minister raise his eyes from his chaos and commit the UK to joining the diplomatic boycott? Or does his desperation for trade deals trump human rights?
No, Mr. Speaker, because we make all those points regularly to the Chinese, and I did to President Xi when I talked to him recently. As I've said before, we do not support sporting boycotts, but there are no plans for ministers, certainly no plans for ministers to attend the Winter Olympics.
Dr. Carol-Angels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents in Sleaford and North Hykeham are struggling to access an NHS dentist, leading to pain and suffering, in particular for children, military families and veterans. My right honourable friend has invested a record amount of money in the NHS. Does he agree with me that some of this money must be used to level up dental care provision? Does he share my surprise that there is no dental school in the East Midlands, and will he back my campaign for a dental school in Lincolnshire?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know that Health Education England are working extensively in Lincolnshire to improve the recruitment and retention of dentists. I understand that they agree with her about the uneven distribution of dental schools throughout the country, and I'm sure as they consider their next steps, they will have heard her appeal.
Mary Kelly Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Storm Arwen left thousands of people in Bear Park, Ludworth, Sherburn and Waterhouses without heating or electricity. Yet it took 5 days for a ministerial statement to be made and a week to send in the army. My constituents weren't just left without power, they were left without a government that cares. Can the Prime Minister look me in the eye and honestly say that he did everything he could as soon as he could to help the people of Durham?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I can, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell her that I was in contact with representatives of the local authorities, of the Army, of Northern Power Grid and others to see what more we could do to assist them in restoring power. And I sympathise very much with the families who lost power for an unconscionably long period, Mr. Speaker, and the House will have heard the explanation of the various electricity companies about why that was so. We must learn the lessons from storms Arwen and Barra and make sure nothing like that happens again.
David Warburton.
Mr. Speaker, I know we'll all agree that our vaccination programme has been a tremendous success. Vaccinations are the front line of defence against all variants of COVID, and the booster jab is a vital component of this. But in rural areas like mine, our booster centres are often few and very far between, and 2/3 of housebound people, those perhaps most vulnerable, most susceptible and most in need, haven't yet received their booster. So can I ask my right honourable friend what steps the government's taking to ensure more centres are available, particularly in rural areas, and would he ask the Health Secretary to meet me with some urgency to ensure my constituents can get their boosters and stay protected this winter?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, amongst the heroes of the vaccine rollout are, of course, pharmacists, as he rightly says, up and down the country. And we have 1,500 community pharmacies vaccinating people near where they live. I know that the NHS are considering the need to support more pop-up clinics where there's a need. I'm happy to arrange a meeting with him and the Vaccines Minister to discuss this further.
Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister tell the House
whether there was a party in Downing Street on the 13th of November?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, but I'm sure that whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know the booster vaccines are essential in our fight against COVID. Speaking to clinical colleagues, one of the biggest hindrances is the 15 minutes people have to wait post-Pfizer. If we could reduce that or take that away, it could release thousands of hours of clinicians' time. So will the Prime Minister ask the MHRA and the JCVI to look to see if it is safe to do so, particularly for those people receiving their third Pfizer booster?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend makes a very good point, and I can tell him that we are in the process of reviewing the 15-minute waiting requirement for both booster doses, and we continue to be guided by the JCVI and the MHRA.
Catherine Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents are having to resort to DIY dentistry, including performing DIY dentistry on their own children. Money, not anything has been allocated to NHS dentistry. So can the Prime Minister explain why my constituents cannot access an NHS dentist?
Prime Minister.
I thank her, but we're putting record funding into the NHS, including into NHS dentistry. And if she'd like to write to me with the cases that she mentions, I'd be happy to take it up with the Secretary of State for Health.
Stuart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On many occasions, the Prime Minister has spoken, I know, to primary-aged children about careers and the opportunities that are ahead of them. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that every child should have the chance to meet adults from different professions, different backgrounds, to be inspired for the future, and that this could play a major part in delivering the levelling up agenda?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend, and it's absolutely true that throughout our career strategy, we've invested so far £2 million to support career-related learning in primary schools, and as anybody in this House will know, you get the most extraordinary questions from primary schools children, and they are often very, very ambitious for their futures.
Jane Dromey.
Mr. Speaker, Jane wrote from Erdington. Her father, Vince, died of COVID. 5 days later, her sister died of COVID. She is devastated and appalled at recent revelations as to what has gone on in Downing Street. She asks this question of the Prime Minister: does trust in British politics matter?
Yes, it does, Mr. Speaker, and that's why it's so absolutely vital that, of course, we should get to the bottom of whatever may or may not have taken place on the 18th of December last year, but we need to focus on what's happening this year, Mr. Speaker, and I urge her and everybody else to get their booster jab and to look after themselves.
Mr. Speaker, at the moment, indecent exposure or flashing is illegal offline, but not online. I really welcome my right honourable friend's support for that to change when he spoke to the Liaison Committee in November. Will he support outlawing cyber flashing and other forms of sexual image abuse online in the forthcoming online safety bill when it comes to this House?
I thank my right honourable friend, and she's right to draw attention to that phenomenon of cyber flashing, and it is one of the issues that is being addressed by my right honourable friend in the Online Harms Bill.
John McNulty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year I asked the Prime Minister what progress had been made delivering his pledge to buy 4,000 ZEBs by 2024. The budget and the spending review confirmed the UK Government planned investment will not reach that target. As Vice Chair of the Bus, Coach and APPG, let me tell the Prime Minister, bus manufacturers have no orders from his Zebra scheme. Production lines in Falkirk, Ballymena and Scarborough, desperate to start orders and deserve better than this. Prime Minister, why is your government failing to deliver these orders and that pledge?
Mr. Speaker, we are absolutely committed to delivering 4,000 zero-emission buses, and we're also committed to supporting UK bus manufacturing.
Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has already been asked about the Winter Olympics, but listening to his answer, I have to say, sadly, I think it is not at all strong enough. May I support the request that the UK government now acts against this dictatorial, brutal Chinese regime that is persecuting everybody from Christians through to Tibetans and terrorising the Uyghurs. Would the British government follow suit to the Americans, the Australians, even the Lithuanians? And please, please, I beg of him, give a lead for human rights and make a diplomatic boycott of these Olympic Games.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it was clear from what I said earlier on that the government has no hesitation in raising these issues with China, as I did with President Xi the last time I talked to him, and there will be effectively a diplomatic boycott of the of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. No ministers are expected to attend. What I think the House and no officials, Mr. Speaker, but what I can tell the House is that I do not think that sporting boycotts are sensible, and that remains the policy of the government.
Douglas Chapman.
The Prime Minister will be aware of the recent National Audit Office report on bounce-back loans and eye-watering levels of fraud and criminality uncovered. In the interest of the taxpayer, will the Prime Minister initiate a Great British bounce-back fraud squad to recover this public money and prosecute where appropriate, even if the crime was committed more than a year ago?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course we will take action against anybody who's defrauded any of the COVID loans, bounce-back loans or otherwise.
William Ragg.
Mr. Speaker, there are media reports of a Cabinet meeting and press conference this afternoon to initiate COVID Winter Plan B without reference to this House. COVID passes will not increase uptake of the vaccine, but will create a segregated society. Is my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, aware that very few will be convinced by this diversionary tactic?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no decisions will be taken without consulting the Cabinet.
Alan Khan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This country is angry, and understandably so. Last Christmas, while we were in lockdown, millions of people were unable to be with their families. Thousands of people waved through their care home windows at loved ones, wishing them a Merry Christmas from the side of the road. People died without that last touch from their daughters, their sons, their wives. Working in intensive care, I wept behind my mask as 3 children, talking to their dying mother on an iPad, begged her to wake up. Countless children now growing up without parents, while parties were held at number 10. Mr. Speaker, this is disgraceful. This is an insult to everyone who followed the rules. It is an insult to everyone who wasn't allowed to say their final goodbye. This happened on the Prime Minister's watch. So my question is very simple. How does the Prime Minister sleep at night?
Mr. Speaker, I want to say, first of all, I want to repeat what I've said earlier on about what happened last year, a year ago, but or what may not have happened. But I want to say this. I share and understand her grief and her feelings. I thank her for her service in the NHS. And, Mr. Speaker, I know how much this country has been through, and I know how difficult it has been through. And if you ask me how I sleep at night, well, the answer is, of course, I take full responsibility and personal responsibility for everything that this government has done. But I must say to you, Mr. Speaker, and I say to the House, the way forward for this House, for this country now, is to focus on the position we are in and above all, to get our vaccinations as fast as we possibly can. We're in a much better position this year than we were last year, and that is thanks to the vaccination rollout, and I urge every member of this House to join that campaign and that great British vaccination effort.
There's lots of points of order. I'll take the Leader of the SNP.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
That brings us to the end of an extremely difficult Prime Minister's questions, unsurprisingly, for Boris Johnson. And as regular viewers will know, on Politics Live, for the second part of the programme on a Wednesday, we have a government minister and a shadow government spokesperson. Well, we have the shadow government spokesperson, but we don't have a government minister. Despite endless calls to the government, none was supplied. We didn't get any calls back. No one took our calls, any answers or texts. So I am pleased to say that Richard Holden, the Conservative MP for North West Durham, who was here for the first part of the programme, has stayed. We haven't forced him. He has stayed willingly. And we have Stephen Kinnock, Shadow Defence Minister, Shadow Defence Minister for the Armed Forces, and the BBC's political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. Let's just start, actually, with the Labour MP Rosanna Allen-Khan in quite a sort of moving testimony there of what was going on last year for many families, she said, who were losing loved ones, parents, in the example that she used. And she said that what went on in Downing Street last year was disgraceful and an insult, asking the Prime Minister how he sleeps at night. And he said he took full responsibility for everything that the government has done. How much trouble is the Prime Minister in?
I think this is a very bad moment for this administration, no doubt about it. And I think that that was a pretty gobsmacking session of Prime Minister's questions, actually. You know, our viewers know week after week we sit here, we discuss the soap opera, we discuss the policies that are going up and down the charts of political interests. But I really think that that was a very important session, because after a week of sort of denials that anything happened in Downing Street, the Prime Minister choosing to give non-denials, to use the jargon, Boris Johnson still stood there actually today and told the country that he doesn't still know what happened under his own roof. He's announced an investigation into what may or may not have happened, when millions of people around the country have seen leaked footage of some of his team discussing what did happen, and not just what did happen, but how they might be able to explain it if it were ever actually to become public. And given the level of, I think, you know, real sort of moral fury on the Labour side, and also real Conservative anger and upset that, you know, no government ministers, there's a reason why none of them wanted to speak today. I don't think this is the end of the matter. And I don't think that today saying that the Cabinet Secretary will have an investigation somehow ends it all. Far from it.
Right, was that good enough for you, Richard? You said earlier on in the programme that you wanted clarification and answers. Did you get any?
Well, I think we got some. I think it's quite good that we're actually going to get that investigation now by the Cabinet Secretary. It's quite clear that the Prime Minister wasn't at number 10 at the time of this event on the 18th of December, and we're going to get a proper investigation to that. I think the key thing from that is that it reports quickly so that we can get answers to this event, and then we can move on from it. But I'm really glad that the Prime Minister, apologised unreservedly for the, for the impression that all of this has given to the public, especially when we're now today looking at further restrictions in light of the Omicron variant.
Right, but this has gone on for over a week. Why doesn't he just admit there was a party and apologise for that party having broken COVID rules?
Well, I think what the Prime Minister said was quite important, is that if staff members had actually broken any rules, then they would face disciplinary action, and I think that's quite an important thing to do.
What do you think that the Prime Minister doesn't know what's going on under his own roof?
Look, the Cabinet Secretary is going to be looking at it. Downing Street is a large building with a lot of people working there. I'm glad the Cabinet Secretary is looking at it, and I want, answers as quickly as possible.
Yeah, but what does it say about the Prime Minister of this country that he doesn't know what is going on at number 10? He's admitted that he didn't know. He said he was repeatedly assured that the rules were not broken. If he doesn't know what's going on, how on earth can people trust him to know what's going on in the country?
Well, he's asked the Cabinet Secretary to find out exactly what happened.
Yeah,
and I think that, I don't think you can ask more than that, really.
Well, I don't know. Do you think your constituents will be satisfied with that?
My constituents will want this investigation to happen quickly and swiftly, and then outcomes from it with, if necessary, sanctions for anybody who broke any rules.
Well, your Conservative colleague, Jake Berry, has told Sky News that he's amazed that Allegra Stratton, the then press secretary, whom we saw in the video, still has a job. Do you agree? Should people resign now or be forced to resign?
I think we need to have this investigation. I think it's only fair that due process is followed. But if people have broken the rules, then it's obviously right that they would resign.
There were questions about other parties, Laura, at Prime Minister's Questions from the Labour MP Catherine West. There's also been a tweet which we may be able to show our viewers from Dominic Cummings, who you'll remember, of course, was the chief advisor to Boris Johnson last year, but left, resigned. It says, will the CABSEC, the Cabinet Secretary, also be asked to investigate the flat party on Friday the 13th of November, more than a month earlier, the other flat parties and the flats bubble policy?
Now, the key question about when he's referring to the flat, or anyone refers to the flat, they are referring, of course, to where the Prime Minister lives with his wife, Carrie Johnson. Now, we should say, and our viewers will know this very plainly from this whole saga, there is no love lost between Carrie Johnson and Dominic Cummings.
Yep.
And over his departure, he pointed to one of the reasons, a sort of massive interference he alleged from her. And clearly, they had a pretty tricky relationship. But as you say, a Labour MP did raise this in the Commons. I have to say, in the last 7 days, there has been all sorts of chatter about various events that were going on in Downing Street through that time. Sources have told us that there was some kind of quiz that took place in Downing Street on another occasion. We know also there were suggestions about a sort of small, informal leaving do. The Department for Education has even admitted last night that they had Christmas drinks for some of their staff. And in total contrast with how Downing Street have dealt with it, they have said, yeah, OK, it happened, it probably shouldn't have done. But I think that is one of the reasons why this has still got some way to play. This is not necessarily just about one evening. And I also wonder, although, yes, the Prime Minister said, well, there'll be disciplinary action if anything is found, you know, there may well be some quite junior staff in Downing Street sitting there today thinking, well, my career might be over because of this. I might get into terrible trouble because of this. And the Prime Minister is standing there sort of saying, well, I was told that it was all fine. How hard did he really ask? How hard did he really look? And how hard will the Cabinet Secretary really look in terms of this investigation?
Right, and actually, at the same time, we're expecting the government to bring in further COVID restrictions today. And, I mean, they may include the sorts of things that people had perhaps thought wouldn't be returning because of the Omicron variant. As far as I know, we haven't had any new statistics today. We had them, of course, last night that might have triggered the call for more COVID restrictions to be brought in, which could mean COVID passports, vaccine passports for certain settings, and guidance for people to work from home, as they are already doing in Scotland and Wales. How is that looking? Because there was a Conservative MP who also asked William Ragg, is this a diversionary tactic?
Well, there are two things about it. Number one, it is absolutely true that concern in Whitehall has been rising about the Omicron variant. That is absolutely true. It's also true that we believed that there might be some kind of COVID press conference on Wednesday, today. But we had at the beginning of the week, just 48 hours ago, thought that might be about the sort of booster programme or to talk about the success. It's the anniversary of the vaccine programme today. And there are Conservative MPs publicly, which is quite extraordinary, William Ragg in that session there, accusing Downing Street of trying to create a diversion, which would be restrictions that would affect millions of people across the land in order to get away from a damaging story. Now, I'm sure that Downing Street would, deny that vehemently. It was discussed at Cabinet yesterday. But it's pretty extraordinary, and it tells you something about the level of backbench trust in Downing Street that even some of them might believe that is something they might even consider.
What's your response to that?
Well, as Laura says, this is something that's been on the cards for a few days. This press conference this afternoon, it's clearly something discussed at Cabinet yesterday, as Laura says. So, I think you can perhaps read a little bit too much into some of these things as well.
But, Richard, some of your colleagues think, though, this government would be capable of doing that they would say, fine, we're going to bring back restrictions to distract people from a damaging story for us.
Well, as you know, it's been there for a few days, as this has been expected. There will be some form of announcement today. And as you said, the Cabinet discussed these things yesterday. So I can, I think I'll leave it at that.
Did Keir Starmer do enough today in Prime Minister's questions? Because we have a long list of people calling on the Prime Minister to consider his position. Your colleague, Labour MP Dawn Butler, the Prime Minister needs to resign. The Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey has said he needs to consider his position. We've had the SNP leader at Westminster saying something very similar. And we've also had Conservative MP Roger Gale saying if it is found out that that party was held and broke COVID rules and the Prime Minister knew about it, he should consider his position. But Keir Starmer didn't go that far.
I think Keir really wants to put the national interest first. We're potentially going into another wave of this virus, and I think he feels that at this particular moment in time, the government ship is already so rocky. There is such profound incompetence, lying and corruption at the heart of government. To call on the Prime Minister to resign right now before this inquiry has been completed clearly is not the right thing to do. It's not in the national interest at this very moment. But I think we are in a position where we have now a Prime Minister who's losing the confidence of the House, losing the confidence of the country, and is seeking, I think, to throw his own staff under the bus in order to divert attention from himself. And what we know is the Prime Minister will do whatever it takes to save his own political skin, even if that means sacrificing others. I think there's also a huge issue here around the profound moral question, considering what people had to go through, considering, as my colleague Rosina Aline Khan pointed out, children watching their mother die on an iPad. It is utterly heartbreaking. And we need to see the Prime Minister, at the very least, saying, look, the party took place. Everybody knows it took place. It's blindingly obvious that it took place. Please just show a little bit of leadership. Come forward. Say it took place. We apologise. It was absolutely the wrong thing to do. Then we can perhaps start to have a situation where we begin to rebuild trust at a time where trust is desperately needed if we are going to go into another wave of lockdown and restrictions.
Richard, wouldn't that be the way to go?
Well, the Prime Minister's apologised unreservedly in the House today for the impression that's been created over the last week or so. And, you know, he's launched an investigation. I agree with Stephen that we need to wait for the outcome of that investigation to see what should happen next.
But apologising unreservedly for an impression of something that may not look great is not the same as saying everything that has gone on over the past week points to a party having taken place. And I apologise for that party having taken place when everybody else was sacrificing their freedom. Would you, if you were advising anyone at Number 10, say that that was what should be said by the Prime Minister himself?
What I'd be advising is to get this Cabinet Secretary's investigation sorted out as quickly as possible so that the entire country is able to move on from this.
Right, well, will they be able to move on? This investigation, we don't know how long it is going to take, the investigation into what went on. Probably not that long, bearing in mind there is quite a lot of evidence to look at that is already out there. If it comes back that the Prime Minister knew or top officials knew, should the Prime Minister, would he be in breach of the ministerial code and therefore misleading Parliament, have to resign?
I think it's pretty clear that the Prime Minister had no idea what was going on. He wasn't there at the time, and has, you know, he's asked for this investigation. So I think let's just find out and see what the Cabinet Secretary says.
But we see from the video that leaked that all of the people in that room know a party took place. That conversation wouldn't have been happening in the way that it did. And what's, of course, adding insult to injury is they all thought it was a bit of banter and having a bit of fun about it, showing how cleverly they were able to lie to the British people. And you know, it's absolutely clear with that video. I think everybody knew before the party took place. There were no clear denials of it. They tried to say it was unsubstantiated allegations, but now they're saying they're going to have an investigation. So they clearly recognise that the allegations have substance. It is absolutely clear the party took place. Otherwise, that leaked video wouldn't have taken place, and that conversation wouldn't have taken place. So let's just accept that. show some leadership, and then we can begin to build, rather than try and kick the whole thing into touch with an investigation.
But what impact is this going to have, I mean, to Laura first, but to everybody, on the likelihood of high levels of compliance with the new rules that we are expecting to come in possibly this afternoon or tomorrow?
Well, I think, Jo, I mean, it's difficult to predict, OK?
Of course.
And actually, one thing that has been very striking, actually, over the last of these very difficult nearly 2 years now is actually the public has repeatedly shown very, very high levels of willingness to follow rules. You know, millions of people have absolutely followed everything to the letter. And I think initially in government, actually, people were surprised at how much people did actually stick to the rules and those really sort of high levels of people having patience with them. I think that this does definitely make it much harder, because even as one Whitehall source said to me last night, who, you know, is not somebody who is a critic of Boris Johnson particularly, but someone who said, even as an ordinary punter and someone who works in government, I now feel stupid for having followed the rules. And the implication being that many people will feel differently about following everything that happens. And there's no doubt if the Prime Minister goes ahead with the press conference this afternoon and is trying to distribute important public health messages, of course, he's still going to be asked about this and what he knew, why didn't he know what was going on under his roof. And I think there will be a lot of concern that public compliance will be much less. And don't forget, there's also a very strong strain on the Tory backbenches of people who do not want to support further restrictions, and they are not going to be any more minded to vote for them as and when that happens.
Will you vote for any new restrictions coming in? I know that you don't know exactly what they are, but we do know broadly, and I've already outlined them in terms of working from home. Are you one of those Conservative MPs that's sceptical about further restrictions?
I don't want to see any unnecessary restrictions come in, and I will have to, as I said, Jo, I'll just have to see what case has been made by the government on this, but I really don't want to see any restrictions in place at all any longer than possible.
Are you against or in favour of vaccine passports to be used in certain settings, be they nightclubs or big events like football matches?
I really do not want to see further restrictions, whether that's vaccine passports. I don't want to see masks having to be worn for longer than necessary. I don't want to see people being forced to work from home for longer than necessary, because I actually think that it's really important. I spoke to a head teacher the other day about the impact that this has had on the kids in the school, the impact that I spoke to a small business, the impact that this has on their new staff coming in. They can't get that learning, that osmosis that you get in an office environment or even a manufacturing environment. So I don't want to see any restrictions as long as possible, but we'll see what the government case is made.
Are you in favour or against vaccine passports?
I think that what we've seen is the government being too slow to catch up on many of these issues. We said we wanted pre-departure tests for travel. They finally caved in on that. They've not invested in ventilation in schools.
But what about the restrictions that we might be expecting? You will support them?
I think the case for vaccine passports is a very strong one. I think that it should certainly apply to large-scale events.
So you'll back those?
I think
it comes to a vote and...
We absolutely need to see the detail of the proposal, but Labour has said that we think there's a very strong case for vaccine passports. We need to see what the government, how broad the scope is of those. If it's such a narrow scope that it's not going to make any difference, then you may say, well, you know, actually this needs to be broader in the way that it's being applied. But we need to see it also being applied in a way that's viable and practicable for the businesses that would need to be implementing it.
Before we move on, I know we've only got a few minutes left. Is this Cabinet Secretary investigation going to draw a line under any of this?
Well, I think it will depend when it comes, Jo, but I suspect not. I mean, this story isn't running out of steam at all, and it has caused profound upset inside the Tory party, outside the Tory party, and it is now having what is pompously called cut-through in Westminster. In other words, millions of people have seen this footage. Many people will be talking about it today. We know, and I know from my own bin box, you know, people are angry about this for all sorts of different reasons, and that means, you know, a technical investigation that, you know, pieces of paper being moved around in Whitehall is not going to stop that.
Can I just show you this tweet from Ian Duncan Smith? He asked a question about a diplomatic boycott. He has tweeted, you may have missed it, actually, in all the furore during Prime Minister's questions, that Boris Johnson did confirm there will be a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics with no ministers or officials attending. Is that the right decision, and would you back that too?
Absolutely. If that's what the Prime Minister said, it was all a bit sort of mumbling and bumbling. I'm not entirely clear, but if they are indeed finally agreeing with what Labour has been calling for months now, then we're finally seeing the government recognising that the Chinese regime is persecuting the Uyghur people in Tibet, sabre-rattling over Taiwan. We need to see leadership. We need to see some moral purpose in our foreign policy, and it would be unthinkable to send members of the royal family to rub shoulders with the very people who've been orchestrating a genocide against their own people.
What's your reaction?
No, I'm 100%. I think Stephen and I agreed on this one. Whether it's the persecution of the Uyghurs, the persecution in Tibet, the fact that they're denying democracy and trying to roll back on that in Hong Kong, or threatening their neighbours, we really cannot be in a situation where the Chinese can get away with this sort of thing.
All right, well, that's all we've got time for. Thank you to all of my guests today on what was a very busy programme. I will be back tomorrow, of course, with more Politics Live at 12:15. From all of us here, bye-bye.